When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and tonight I'm joined by Violet Johnson, who is the Executive Director of Landmarks. And we've had shows about landmarks before, but not with Violet. You're relatively new. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself to start with?
Of course, Rana. I wanted to start by thanking you for having me on. I've been really welcomed positively by the people of New London and Groton, and I know I'm new to the city and new to the position, but it's really been an exciting opportunity. I'm the Executive Director of New London Landmarks. We're coming up on a year in the position, and I was with the company for about 6 months prior to that. I was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, educated at the University of Rhode Island, and a recent transplant to Connecticut.
Nice, and so welcome to Landmarks. How has the experience been?
It's been really exciting. So I graduated from the University of Rhode Island semi-recently, a couple of years ago now, with dual degrees in history and political science, and I was unemployed for a bit, and I managed to make a connection at a regional conference with my former boss, Alicia Primer, and from there I was able to work that into the current position I have now, which means I've been having to do a lot of learning on my feet, but I'm the sort of person who does like to dive right in the deep end. So there's been a lot of things to learn, but it's been an incredibly pleasant experience.
Well, New London is actually a good place to have that, dive into the deep end feel about it.
Yeah, and there is so much history in New London, more than even I knew about coming in.
So I know we've had shows about landmarks before, but they were, actually it was years and years ago. I think the last one I had might have been with Constance, who was executive director, a few directors ago. So do you want to talk a little bit about what New London Landmarks does and about its history?
Of course. This is actually the 50th anniversary of New London Landmarks. We were originally created as the New London Railroad Station Trust, which the goal of which was to protect Union Station in New London. They were going to tear it down, but it's this very important architectural piece. It's H.H. Richardson's last train station, and so a lot of concerned citizens came together, they protested, they fought, and they eventually evolved into what is now New London Landmarks, which is a historic preservation advocacy group. We also do some public history. We have files on a lot of buildings, but most of what we do is help connect people with resources to preserve their historic homes. We run events on architectural history and New London history. We comment, and I personally make myself known at various issues involving historic structures in and around New London, and provide a resource for people who want to learn more about historic preservation, as well as to fight for and protect their own historic structures.
And there are a lot of those historic structures in New London, and some are protected and some are not.
Exactly. That's a struggle we've been running into, because there are different definitions of historic. Obviously, a lot of the buildings in New London are over 50 years old. They have these interesting histories. Many are from the late 1800s, some even from the 1700s, though we have less of those than many neighboring Connecticut towns.
Well, thanks to Benedict Arnold.
Obvious reasons, yes. But within New London, there are 13 recognized historic districts, and then a variety of other individually recognized buildings that are smattered around the city. And New London Landmarks, we occasionally get these buildings listed. The most recent set of buildings were the Desant houses, owned by, originally, Antoine Desant, a very important black whaler in New London history. His journals were uncovered and donated relatively recently, before I came on the scene, but I was lucky enough to oversee the completion of that listing, which was very exciting.
Wow. And, you know, it's really sad to think that a lot of the old New London was lost. One of your recent events was with Bill Morse, who wrote a book about, you know, the north end of what was the New London's downtown. And I never saw New London at that time. We moved to Connecticut, I think, in 1977, and most of the damage was already done. And so I think I like the current New London, but I think I might have liked the old New London a little bit better.
Yeah. It's interesting because we want to prevent, obviously, the destruction of historic buildings, but sometimes new and beautiful things end up taking their place, and you want to make sure that whatever new structures have come in the place of what's been lost, again, we want to fight that destruction as much as we can, but obviously lost New London is no longer with us. And it's our job now to preserve what's there now and make sure that that tragedy doesn't happen to another community.
Yeah, because there have been a lot of waves of it, and I'm planning and zoning commission for a little while yet. I think my term ends in November, but some towns have adopted form-based code, which I think might help somewhat. Focusing less on what people are going to do within the building and more on making sure whatever new is constructed or whatever already exists fits in with the streetscape and preserves that integrity, because buildings are more permanent than uses. But I've heard from some friends in Hartford that it's not a cure-all, that they still have issues with gentrification, with displacement of residents from old neighborhoods. So I don't know what the answer is, how to totally protect those neighborhoods, but I hope we do a better job in the future than we have in the past. But since you mentioned the sound houses, maybe we should talk about the Black Heritage Trail, which is, I know it was a collaboration. New London Landmarks was involved. Curtis Goodwin, when he was on City Council, was involved. And let's let people, people see the plaques, I guess, but maybe it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about how that came to be and what sites there are now.
Of course, I would be more than happy to talk about that. The Black Heritage Trail is a very interesting piece of research that was done. I go around and I make sure those QR codes on those plaques work still, and occasionally wipe the bird poop off. But the Black Heritage Trail, I wasn't necessarily involved in the creation. I was still at the University of Rhode Island while this was going on. But it's something that, as the executive director, I now have the chance to help steward and take care of. And while New London Landmarks is obviously involved in the trail as a collaboration, I still like to highlight it and pay as much attention to it as I can. Really, there's two key aspects to this, which is the first is very important to me, which is integrating the fact that Black history is just regular history. It is part of the history of New London, and highlighting it is important because so many people, and over time, so many people forget that it is part of New London's history, and that we have had so many really influential Black figures in this city. On top of that, it shines light on all of these buildings that people might not think twice about. Having these plaques that are new, bright, they have a bunch of text on them that really draws people in, is a way to make people see that a building isn't just what it's being used for right now, which might seem a little redundant, but when we get stuck in our routines and our ways, it can become hard to imagine that a building belonged to any other business than the one it currently has within its walls, right? So these are really great ways of making history feel alive and reminding people that not only have we had so many different individuals and organizations within our historic structures, we could have so many other new exciting things in New London's future.
And, the Black History Trail, how many sites are there now?
Off the top of my head, I'm afraid I don't recall.
It can be estimated.
I believe it is 14. Like I said, I wasn't involved in the creation, but I do go around and I try to take care of them. And it's an always expanding effort. We want to add more locations and to continue expanding it because it's a collaboration. These things tend to take a little more time than if it was solely a New London Landmarks venture. But also, I wouldn't want this to be an independent venture because something like this is about telling a whole of a town's history and a whole of a city's history. And having all of these wonderful independent researchers who contributed to this project is something that really pays such high dividends. So I mentioned the Anton de Sant houses, which are on the Black Heritage Trail. And the only reason that those buildings are on the National Register right now is because of the in-depth research that was done for the Black Heritage Trail. That was the foundation of everything.
Now, it seems as though research is a big part of maybe the hidden stuff that New London Landmarks does. Can you talk about some of the other things in New London that you've researched that maybe other people who live here haven't even thought much about?
Of course. So when it comes to research, obviously while we're focused on helping to preserve buildings, a lot of times understanding why a building might be in the condition that it's in, or why someone might want to make changes to it, involves going back and learning everything about its history. For example, the Second Congregational Church, I ended up having to do a deep dive on the history of that building for obvious reasons, and discovered that the steeple was not actually put on the church when it was first created. It was put on about a year later, might have been 2 years later, because they didn't have the funds when they first were putting up the church to put up the steeple. Now, I'm very happy to see that steeple stabilized, and I think that there are some very good options for that building in the future. Obviously, I want to protect that steeple and that building in general.
Yeah, it would be traumatic, actually, to have the Second Congregational Church fall down after the First Congregational Church did it a couple of years ago.
I promise you, I'm doing everything I can to prevent that from happening. And there are definitely a lot of good options going forward for that building. But that's another case of seeing that the struggles we're having with this structure now mirror the struggles of the past. And it makes the problem seem not less distressing, but less overwhelming, because it's funds for the steeple was an issue back in the 1800s, and it's an issue now. We also run our whale plaque program. I'm sure you've seen them around town. They're those white plaques with the little whales. So when you order a whale plaque, now you get a narrative history with it. I think we've been doing this for 10 years, the narrative histories in particular.
Yeah, I do have a whale plaque at my house, but we bought it about 30 years ago and there was already a plaque. And there is a folder that has some history. I haven't compared it to more recent ones to see if they're, I guess I should.
Absolutely.
And see if there are updates or deeper dives. I'm on Evergreen Avenue. I noticed that we're not the only one on Evergreen Avenue. I think it was an 1890s subdivision. And our house actually was not really a great house or a residence. I think it was a workshop originally that became a house. But it's kind of funny to think that there were subdivisions being built, in 1892.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to look back at the 1800s and the early 1900s in New London, because you see a population growth that means, but you also have a lot of the late 1800s buildings that are being replaced with early 1900s buildings, especially homes or workers' residences. I live in a converted building. I won't get into the specifics of which one, but I live in a building from the early 1900s. And you never know what a building used to be. Right now, we are doing some research on a home that used to be a bowling alley. And it has an extremely strange shape because of that. So you never know what people or what uses there were for buildings in the past. And you see that people have been in the United States and in the world, but also in New London in specific, been reusing structures pretty much as long as we've had them here. There was a lot more variability in building use prior to official zoning. So you see things that were workshops turned into homes, people who were living in the back half and had their business in the front half. All sorts of mixed use and reuse that was surprisingly common in the 1800s.
And I sometimes wonder if that was a better way to go. We saw a lot of population growth between like the 1890s and the 1950s. And since 1960, New London has quite a bit less, maybe 20% less population than it did in the 60s. So I don't know. And yet we have more paving, fewer trees. I don't know, are we giving so much extra space to transit, to cars? I don't know if that's part of the answer, but maybe.
I will say that when it comes to the major issues in historic preservation in New London, they have almost always been associated with trying to get rid of our train stations and to bring in more car-dependent infrastructure. I will say, I commuted to New London by car, so I do take advantage of that.
Right.
But I think we have to be going forward very intentional, and I want to say that reversibility is key. This is something that was emphasized by the State Historic Preservation Office when it comes to making changes to your home, but I think it also applies to a community. Because if you have a major influx of people, you need to be able to still maintain buildings if those people move out, because you never know when that influx will start again.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have to say, you were talking about all the old buildings, like the second 1900s buildings replacing the 1800s buildings. So my house, in theory, was built in 1892, and our backyard doesn't really quite back up onto the railroad tracks, but it's near enough that I believe it was used commercially, something connected with railroads. But my in-laws are on the West Coast. They're in Oregon. And when we bought the house in New London in 1892, no one bats an eyelash, really. But when we told our relatives on the West Coast, we bought a house that was built in 1892, I mean, the oldest building in Salem, Oregon is probably from the 1870s. So they thought, wow, there just aren't many buildings that are just regular houses that people live in that were, at the time, it was just about 100 years old when we bought it. And so, I don't know, it's a funny situation that we often do not really appreciate what we have, but the idea of being adaptable enough that we can switch uses as needed is something that, I don't think zoning really is the best way to get that. But we could probably talk about zoning quite a bit, and I might get in a little bit of trouble, but...
if I could make a quick aside,
sure.
Though, because I do find your point about not really realizing how unique the history that we have is very important, because there's two layers to it. There's first the layer that we're kind of insulated within New England as a whole when it comes to the age of buildings, and then New London is very well intact in a lot of ways. I mean, we've been damaged in a lot of other ways, but we have so many of these historic buildings. And so we don't even realize that within Connecticut we have something really special.
And in New London, in particular, I you know, I'm a transplant here. I grew up in Philadelphia. I traveled around a lot in my 20s. And I feel like New Londoners kind of don't really appreciate what we have. And even things like, you know, 5.5 square miles of land space that is almost always brought up as being a real challenge. It's a challenge to development. That's why, you know, it's the destruction of neighborhoods to create more developable space has happened in a few waves. And I think of it, and it's like, you know, let's look at it a different way. And maybe 5.5 square miles, that means we could make it really pedestrian and bicycle friendly, right? Because from the Conn College to Ocean Beach is a haul. It's probably about 6 miles. But if you're in a city that no point in the city is farther than 6 miles from any other point in the city, then, you know, that's kind of an advantage in some ways.
Yeah, I think that there is, for such a small city, everyone does know each other, from what I can tell. I am relatively new myself, but also so many parts feel sectioned out and not interconnected with each other. And I think anything that could promote a sense of wholeness and a sense of coherent placemaking in New London would be very welcome.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of attempts. I know, you know, I spend a lot of time, although I don't live in the Hodges Square neighborhood, I spend a lot of time in the Hodges Square neighborhood. And, you know, it's a continuing challenge to have that neighborhood feel connected to the rest of the city, even though it really is only about a mile from downtown.
Absolutely.
It's a mystery.
I'm not sure I have the correct solution for it, but it is definitely a very unique location, and it would be nice to see it further integrated somehow. I'm not quite sure how, but there must be a way to do it.
I mean, I have to say that I think that the, you know, new path that was being built from the old mill down to Fulton Park maybe could be a way to connect things. Walking from Fulton Park to the train station, although it's very close, is not a very friendly walk, though. But the distances are really not difficult. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is either. But, you know, I did see on the New London Landmarks website, and I think we have it on the Riverside Park Conservancy website as well, the report on Hodges Square when they did, New London Landmarks actually spearheaded that whole placemaking project in Hodges Square in about, 2012 maybe?
I believe that's the case. I have to say I wasn't there for that either.
No, you weren't. I was, and you know, it was pretty interesting. Not much. I don't think a whole lot changed, but it did get some attention to that area, and some of the work on connecting Fulton Park with the old mill and closer to Riverside did come out of it. But, you know, it's hard. You know, it's hard to get funding for that kind of thing. It's hard for it to be a priority because it doesn't have a short-term gain, or especially not financially. It's really a long-term investment.
That's one of the main issues with promoting preservation, is that preservation is an economic good. It does promote economic development, but it does take time to see that. And oftentimes a quick fix that will damage things in the long run is often seen as more economically viable than historic preservation, even though historic preservation, again, has been proven to have an economic benefit.
Yeah, well, you know, just in terms of tourism, you know, not just people who live here, but tourism, no one is ever going to come visit New London to see Coleman Street. Because, you know, there are thousands of Coleman Streets, even just on the Eastern Seaboard. But they might come and see some of the unique old New London pieces.
And I don't even think it's just tourism. I think it's a sense of place and a sense of identification with the city that makes people want to stay, want to build their lives, feel connected. Is also a matter of how the destruction of buildings affects the property market, affects the housing market. To bring up Bill Morse again, he had a very interesting anecdote about how the destruction of the North End, many of the people who were living there did not move back into New London. And I think part of that is an economic reason, and I think part of that is that when you tear down a person's home, you're telling them that you don't want them in the city any longer. And that really affects the sense of place and someone's desire to stay here and build a life.
Well, after redevelopment, in 1960, I think the population of New London was between 34 and 35,000. And by 1990, it had gone down to between 24 and 25,000. I think it's been holding at 27, 28,000 for a decade now. It hasn't shifted. The demographics might have shifted, but the number has not shifted much. But I think that happens maybe in every wave, because I was here for the Fort Trumbull redevelopment, and most of the people who lost their houses there did not stay in New London. They bought houses in Waterford, they went to Groton, of course, a lot of them are old and they've passed away since, but that was one of the things that was so awful about that Supreme Court decision, was that it actually made a ruling that property ownership in distressed cities is not as secure as property ownership in other places. And that makes no good sense to me, why a person who owns a house in an old city shouldn't have the same property rights as people who own houses in the suburbs.
Exactly. And I mean, many of our board members and volunteers were involved in that fight because there was so much value in that neighborhood, historic, social, community, economic even. And even though obviously the city was economically depressed at the time, that doesn't mean you just tear everything down and try to start over. You have these assets, you have these buildings that may not seem at the time to be viable. But again, when we're talking about preservation, we're talking on a longer scale.
And some actually were, they were a mixed bag. But we do have another slide from Fort Trumbull, and I think maybe we can use this to talk a little bit about adaptive reuse. 72 Goshen Street is across the street from Italian Dramatic Club, if a person wants to kind of figure out where it was. And I was not here when it looked like the very dilapidated buildings on the top picture. But sometime, I'm guessing in the 1980s, Sonalists purchased those two buildings, merged the properties, built a section connecting the two halves, and they used it as an office space for, I don't know, probably about 20 years. They did work that was connected with the with the underwater sound lab that was where the state park is now. And it was a beautiful example of adaptive reuse. You can see the bones of the old buildings and the new ones, but it really, shifted the value, of those buildings. The sad part about it is that in about 2003, that bottom building was demolished, and I didn't put a picture of it, but if you went to that area and you looked at an online map, you would see that the boulevard that they built, the kind of a diagonal road that goes to the Italian Dramatic Club, which was not the original line of Goshen Street. The original line it is still delineated with a row of power lines. So there's sort of a triangle there. But part of the ground this was in is a parking lot, and part of It is sort of like just a separation strip and maybe part of the new road. So nothing really got, put back in its place. And so it kind of shows, on one hand, the great potential for adaptive reuse and why, and when it doesn't last. I don't know.
Absolutely. I think that is a really great example of what adaptive reuse could be used for, and also to keep in mind that unfortunately adaptive reuse doesn't mean that people have committed to protecting that structure. I, of course, was not involved in that process. I think
Right.
that's a fantastic example because you see it still has all of the beautiful details from that original brick building. It maintains the same grade, and it's not super specialized in its use. That could be an office building, that could be a doctor's office, that could be eventually converted back into residences. That was a structure that people put time and effort and money into and could have been home to so many more interesting stories and narratives while protecting the original architectural value and heritage of the city. Unfortunately, you see with buildings like these that people are willing to put money in for a short-term benefit, and that could have been a long-term benefit, but a new short-term benefit popped up.
Yeah.
And I will say, since, this is the Green Party who are having me on here, adaptive reuse is the sounder decision for environmental benefit. Adaptive reuse has a significantly lower carbon sink than the creation of a new structure. And perhaps that was the argument made when they reused these buildings for the Sonalist slab. And now they've knocked it down, and if they want to build a new one, they're going to have to expend those materials, which are going to be worse materials, most likely. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
I know one of the current adaptive reuse projects that, I don't know, we have our fingers crossed about happening is, there's been a lot of attention over the decades about the Capitol Theater. It's been closed for decades. I don't think I've ever seen it open in the 30 years but the first 15 years I lived in the area, I lived in Waterford. I didn't know downtown New London, but I've been in New London for 30 years and have never seen anything happening in the Capitol Theater.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't give you an exact date for when it was last open, but it's definitely over 30 years. I want to say going on 50 now, since it's
That
been
could be.
open consistently. I would love to see this project happen. I have both a professional and a personal interest because I would love to have a place that would have live music with the sorts of bands that I like, but professionally, this would be such a great use for the building. It's honestly barely even adaptive reuse. Technically it is because it's serving a slightly different purpose, but it's as close as you're going to get to the original use of that building because it wasn't a movie theater at start, it was a vaudeville stage. So if you were to translate that to the modern circuit, an indie band venue, I know that I have been in conversation with the individual who's looking to purchase and reuse it. He's come to Historic District Commission meetings. I'm not on the HDC, but I do make a habit of sitting in and making myself heard there. And I've given him access to and tried to connect him with many resources at the state level to get the carrot in addition to the stick when it comes to preserving and taking care of this building. And I would really love to see something beautiful happen with it.
And you mentioned that this isn't really very adaptive because it was always an entertainment venue when it was open. And over the years, there were some plans, I believe, that were more adaptive, that would have preserved the facade but changed the entire inside, everything that was behind the facade. And at one point, some people were kind of resigned to that being the, most likely better outcome. So this is actually a really exciting thing that they're finding a way to use it not quite the way it was. I've never been inside. Bob has been inside. He said it was scary, you know.
It is a wreck, but it is not structurally unsound. The major issues with the interior right now have to do with more cosmetic fixes. I mean, there are animals that are in the building.
Yeah.
All of the seats and some of the plaster has been having some major issues. I'm not saying it's an easy job,
Right.
but I'm saying that the building itself is structurally sound. It is based on the plans that were initially proposed at the HDC, which I can't guarantee are still the plans. It looked like they would follow relatively close to the original setup of the interior. It would just be very nice to see something happen with the building.
It would be great.
And sometimes you do have to accept that the facade of a building will be preserved and the interior might change. But something like this could be such a way to bring the spirit back to that building and continue a long legacy.
And I'm hoping, because, as I said, I've never seen it open, and it would be great. And it seemed at one time that, you know, nothing would ever really happen, and the best we could do was to save the facade.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad to see it, and, you know, I think it would be a good addition to downtown as well.
Like I said, I have both personal and professional investment.
New London Landmarks usually doesn't do rehabilitation on its own, but you have a couple of times.
Yes. Since these are longer term projects, we usually only undertake them if the project is exactly right for us, and because we've only done it a couple of times, it's because it takes a while.
And it's probably not the kind of thing you want to spend your time doing. I mean, some of it doesn't seem to fit in the usual education research kind of thing. It's dealing with contractors and...
So it's not, we're not against doing it. Rehabilitation is something that we're very, very proud of. And again, if it has to be us, it has to be us.
And Franklin Street turned out that way.
Absolutely, and we're very lucky that it has a quality owner, and that it will be shepherded and stewarded into the future. Our offices at 49 Washington Street were also rehabbed by us. That was from what I understand, a very long-term project. But I benefit from it greatly because I get to run the office from there. We store our archives there. We have renters as well. And that's another example of a building that was in extremely poor condition at base. I should have sent some photos, but I have some very interesting images of the building stripped down, with its windows boarded up. But even though it is different than its original intention, where it was a lot of things, but it was a store at one point, but it still has that mixed use of the office space in the front and then residential space on the top, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful building now.
Thank you. We just had it repainted.
And people who are watching this should also know that you can walk in.
Yes, anytime.
Yeah.
I'm in the office pretty much without exception between 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. between Monday and Thursday. I usually take a little jaunt to the post office at some point, but I always welcome walk-ins. And if none of those times work for you, but you really want to get in contact or see the office building, reach out. I will make the time. I am more than happy to show you around. It's honestly hard to get me to stop.
Well, and people, you can walk in and just do some research.
Absolutely.
So that's one, I mean, it really is a resource that's open to everyone. I, fairly recently, within the last year, went in and tried to find out some stuff about a property, Riverside Park, which has a kind of funny past parts of it at least, because it was pieced together from a lot of different parcels and then unpieced partly. But yeah, the resources are really accessible.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. I always welcome drop-ins, as was mentioned, and if there are certain things that maybe might take a little longer to pull up or to access, I'm also more than happy to go through our files and find the right folders and help you get whatever answer you're looking for. But you're absolutely right. Resources can be used for so many things. It doesn't just have to be the basic history of your home. It can be making the case that Riverside Park, I forget the exact argument you were making, but trying to understand how its parceled history works. I also had someone reach out to me because he wanted to prove that his building was formerly open to multiple residences as opposed to single family. And I was able to find him information that proved that it at one point had 2 separate families in it.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm thinking that there were probably a lot of, especially after seeing Bill Morse's presentation, that there were a lot of buildings that were multifamily and mixed-use buildings that would be probably frowned upon nowadays. But at the time, when there was a big influx of immigrants coming in, it seemed like it made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about wanting to have density of people without losing quality of life. And that a lot of the issues with the multifamily housing of the late 18 and early 1900s was a matter of quality of life. The problem wasn't that a bunch of people were living in the same house. It was that they didn't have proper heating or they didn't have proper water access. And if we can ensure, and this is just my personal opinion, that people are living in quality structures, a lot of old structures are quality structures, it doesn't matter how many people are in there, so long as they have space to live and breathe and exist comfortably.
And I think, I don't know if Bill Morse I don't recall if he brought this up when he was doing the presentation at the library, but we definitely discussed it when we talked together, that boarding houses were all kinds of qualities. Some were really death traps, and some were really well run. He brought up that there were several marriages of people who met while living in the same boarding house, but there were other boarding houses where there wasn't heat, and people were using little kerosene space heaters, and some of them died of carbon monoxide poisoning. So I think we all know that even though not all housing needs to be the highest quality, there are certain safety regulations that really do need to be on the books and enforced.
Absolutely, and that is not at all in contrast with preservation. In fact, it's a lot easier for me if the historic buildings I'm trying to take care of don't burn down.
Yes, a lot.
And I think there's a lot of value in the boarding house. I mean, with the housing market as it is, it's probably very nice to pay a low flat rate and at least have a place to sleep with a dry bed and access to food, all of that.
Well, I think they have sort of a bad reputation now, but at one point I thought, wait a minute, if these are kids in college, it's really just like a dorm.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, it isn't the building that's a bad model. So let's regulate the buildings, of course, but not judge the people living in them differently depending on whether they're students or whether they're journeymen, learning a trade.
Exactly. I'm 100% with you. I think so long as these are safe, healthy buildings and the people in them can be safe and healthy people, then there's no shame if you're just out of college and maybe you don't want roommates and you just want a room to yourself. We can't all afford a studio. right off the bat.
Many years ago, I read this article. I think it might have been in, I don't remember what journal it was in, but it was called 3 Things That Modern City Planners Could Learn from the Movie Little Women. And the first one was that, having houses of people from different income levels isn't a bad thing.
Exactly.
And number 2 was, I think that there's a place for boarding houses in cities. And the third was, not everything has to be the highest quality. And, basic safety, yes, but not every place has to have beautiful hardwood floors and, just all really historic features or really great craft, or even, windows that are all at right angles. But we spent quite a long time renting a house in Waterford near the beach that was had been a beach house, and there wasn't a right angle in the whole building, but we didn't fear that it would burn down or anything. It had heat, it had water, it had everything you need. It was not high quality building, but it was kind of an affordable housing option that worked at a certain point in people's lives.
And I'm glad to hear that. And there are all sorts of ways that you can get funding if you are in one of those structures, that you can get to restore it to a quality historic preservation standard, and so that you feel better and more comfortable within the building.
True. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit, I think we have about 10 minutes left, maybe not even quite 10 minutes, about some of your programs, and in particular, there is one coming up.
Absolutely. We actually have a couple coming up, but
Okay,
we'll
we have time for all of them.
Well, I don't want to say anything before I have the sign-ups, but we do have an annual meeting coming up. We have Bill Morris is coming back to the New London Public Library to
nice.
talk about certain topics. And then we have some celebrations for the 250th and for the 50th anniversary of New London Landmarks. But let's focus on the event that I've started promotion for.
Yeah, which is coming up pretty soon.
Yes, that's going to be April 3rd. Friday at 5:30 p.m. at the New London City Hall in the Town Council Chambers. This is an event with local activist, tree supporter, educator, and
who knew? Architect.
Maggie Redfern. She does it all. On the architect James Sweeney. James Sweeney is probably the greatest New London architect you've never heard of. He was active largely at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. He died while he was still a working architect, but he designed over 200 buildings, not all of which were made and not all of which were in New London, but quite a variety.
And it's more than just the 4 you can see on the slide.
Absolutely, far more. And you'll get to see more details and learn a little bit more about his design process. You can actually see 5 on the slide, because the one in the back, that is a blueprint of Maggie Redfern's house.
Ah.
Yeah, and you can see all of that in detail at this presentation. It is free. RSVP is required, though, because you don't want to have any issues with fire regulation, and it's nice to know how many people we're expecting. James Sweeney is a very interesting architect in that he designed so many of the important buildings in New London. The 1912 addition to City Hall, which is not the original City Hall, but which is recognizably City Hall, Harbor School, a wide variety of these important buildings, but also a lot of just domestic houses. He had such variety, which was pretty common for a workman architect at the time. And he was also in, not competition, but in a friendly rivalry with some of the other architects whose names you might know better, such as Dudley Sinclair Donnelly, and then he also worked for Shepley, Rutland, and Coolidge, who you might understand as a successor firm to H.H. Richardson. So all of these interesting connections, and it's really a snapshot into New London at the turn of the century into what architecture was like at the time, changing ideas in American architecture, and I am very excited for it. And you never know if your house is a Sweeney house. I don't believe yours is, because it's 1870s, you said?
1890.
1890. So
no, I think Lodwick Leeds was the name on the various plaques on the block, and there are several by him, which is why I kind of refer to our block as like an early subdivision. I'm guessing it was farmland because most of the houses south, with the exception of like Pequot Colony or some little pockets, but that neighborhood south of the hospital was mostly developed in the 1920s. You can kind of tell, my neighbors told me when we moved in, if you look at a foundation of the house, and if it's older than about 1910, it has a really bad foundation. They put in a dry foundation and then mortar the inside. But the 1920s era houses, the Italian stonemasons were around, and those houses had very nice foundations. So, yeah, but most of that area was farmland that got subdivided during the big population booms of the late 1800s and early 1900s. And I think that I once saw that in 1920, the population of New London was about the same as it was in 1990. You know, it had gone up and it had gone down. So we have like 2 more minutes. How else can people get in touch with you, be supportive of Landmarks, or learn more?
Of course, there's a lot of ways to get in touch, to support us, and to learn more. First things first, we're always looking for volunteers. Do you like to research? Do you like to write? Do you like to work in archives, to digitize? I am always looking for an extra hand, especially when it comes to writing history narratives. I would encourage you to reach out for that. If you want to support us, come to our events. Enjoy what we're able to present and learn more about your city. That's such an important way to support historic preservation, is to understand what these buildings have been and what they could be. Make yourself heard at Historic District Commission meetings or at matters of preservation even at the state level. Of course, donations are always appreciated, as are memberships. Our members help support us, and if you're a New London Landmarks member, you can get a discount on your whale plaque, which I think are very useful in documenting more of New London's history, because with every plaque that we have done, with every narrative history that we do, we fill out a little bit more of a neighborhood. We've had over 500 plaques done throughout our entire history as New London Landmarks, and there's still so many buildings which are eligible for them. And last but not least, if you have any questions, concerns, if you want to know more about your history and your town's history and the architecture around you, please reach out to me, director@newlondonlandmarks.org, or call the office, 860-442-0003. That's 860-442-0003.
And there is a contact form on the website, which is long but easy to remember, newlondonlandmarks.org.
Absolutely. If you Google us, we come right on up. And you can drop by at 49 Washington Street. We have our plaques in the windows, recently freshly painted.
Well, thank you, Violet, for coming on and talking about landmarks. And hopefully we'll see a lot of you on April 3rd at City Hall to learn more about architect Sweeney, who I had never heard of either, but who clearly had a lot of influence on what the look of New London is today.
Maggie's going to give a very, very interesting lecture on that, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, and in 6 months we'll do an update if you want.
I would be more than happy to keep talking.
Thank you so much, and we will see you all next week.
Take care.
Don't